Welcome to Nightly Stories After Dark, where stories aren't just told, they come alive in the recesses of your mind. Tonight, we bring you a special episode. 6 eerie tales to keep you company as you drift to sleep, power through the night shift, or journey down endless roads. This is not a show of flashing visuals or staged scares. It's just you, the sound of my voice, and the stories. Close your eyes, if you dare. Let your imagination paint the scenes, each one more chilling than the last. Settle in, let the world fade away, and let these stories take you somewhere darker, somewhere you may not want to go. This is Nightly Stories After Dark, and the first tale begins now. The Legend of the Hook-Handed Stalker. The air was crisp that night, the kind of chill that creeps through your skin and settles in your bones. It was supposed to be a perfect evening, a secluded spot, far from prying eyes, where laughter and whispers could echo in peace. But the darkness had other plans. They had no idea what awaited them. Just beyond the tree line, something, or someone, was watching. The couple parked their car on the edge of the woods, eager to escape the noise of the city. But as the radio crackled to life, a news alert broke the peace. A dangerous escapee from a nearby institution, armed with a hook for a hand, had been spotted in the area. He laughed it off. "Just a story to scare people," he said. But she wasn't so sure. Her eyes darted to the darkness outside the car, to the shadows that seemed to stretch and move. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Just as they began to relax, a sound interrupted their quiet moment. A faint, rhythmic scrape. At first it seemed like nothing, just the wind brushing against the car perhaps, but then it came again, louder this time. She wanted to go. Something about the sound, about the dark, unsettled her. But he waved it off, teasing her for being paranoid. He told her to relax. Despite her protests, he stepped outside, determined to prove there was nothing to fear. She stayed behind, her eyes scanning the woods for movement. The car felt smaller now, suffocating, as the sound of his footsteps faded into the distance. Minutes passed, too many minutes. She called out his name, but there was no response. Then she heard it again, the scraping sound, this time circling the car. She locked the doors, her breath coming in quick gasps. Whatever was out there was moving closer. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't her imagination. And then, through the fogged-up window, she saw it, a faint reflection of a figure. She couldn't make out the details, but one thing was clear. It was holding something sharp and gleaming in the moonlight. She knew she had to get out of there. With trembling hands, she turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life. But the figure wasn't retreating. It was getting closer, the scraping sound now deafening. She drove as fast as she could, the trees blurring into darkness. But even as she left the woods behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following her. She didn't stop until she reached the first sign of civilization, a lonely gas station on the edge of the highway. The attendant looked up as she burst inside, her face pale and her words frantic. He started to reassure her, to tell her she was safe now, but then he froze, his gaze fixed on something outside. Slowly, he pointed to her car. There, hanging from the driver's side door, was a single metal hook. It gleamed under the gas station lights, still slick with blood. The girl's heart stopped. Whoever, or whatever, had been out there wasn't done yet. The legend of the hook-handed stalker is a warning, a story of fear and survival, and if you hear that faint scratching sound tonight, remember, it might not be the wind. The caller. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. It stood at the end of a lonely cul-de-sac, surrounded by a sea of bare, swaying trees. Inside, the faint glow of a lamp illuminated a young babysitter perched nervously on the edge of the couch, her gaze shifting between the clock and the children's bedroom upstairs. It was just another job, or so she thought. She wasn't used to houses this large. Every creak and groan of the old structure seemed amplified in the silence. But babysitting was familiar territory: snacks, TV, and keeping an ear out for the kids. The parents had been clear. "We'll be back by midnight. Don't open the door for anyone, and call us if there's any trouble." She checked on the children. They were fast asleep, and settled back downstairs with the TV murmuring softly in the background. But then the phone rang. "Have you checked on the children?" The voice was low and deliberate. She froze. Who was this, and how did they know about the children? At first, she told herself it was just a prank, someone bored, someone cruel. But as the minutes ticked by, the shadows in the house seemed to stretch further, and her unease grew. This time, the voice was sharper, colder. "You should check on the children." Panic crept into her voice as she demanded to know who was calling. But the line went dead again, leaving only silence and her pounding heartbeat. The children were safe, still tucked under their blankets, their breathing steady. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She returned to the couch, gripping the phone as if it were a lifeline, hoping the calls wouldn't return. "Why haven't you checked on the children?" This time, there was a sinister edge to the voice. She slammed the phone down and called the police. Her words came out in frantic bursts, describing the situation and the calls. The operator's response sent a chill down her spine. "Stay on the line. We'll trace the call." Minutes passed like hours as she stayed on the line with the operator, her eyes darting to every shadow. Finally, the voice on the other end returned, trembling with urgency. "Get out of the house now. The call is coming from inside." Her heart nearly stopped. She dropped the phone and bolted for the front door, her hand fumbling with the lock as the footsteps drew closer. She flung the door open and ran into the cold night, her screams echoing through the empty neighborhood. When the police arrived, they entered cautiously, weapons drawn. The house, once filled with eerie stillness, now buzzed with tension. Upstairs, they found him. A man crouched in the children's room, clutching a knife. He had been watching her the whole time. She sat in the back of the ambulance, replaying the night over and over in her mind. The man had been in the house the whole time, his calls meant to terrify and trap her. She had survived, but she knew she would never forget the feeling of being hunted in the place she thought was safe. The doll. It sat in the corner of the room, untouched for years, a porcelain doll with glassy blue eyes, a delicate lace dress, and a faintly cracked smile. Dust clung to its curls, and its vacant stare seemed to follow anyone who dared to look at it too long. In the dead of night, the doll became something more than just a forgotten toy. But for now, it waited. When they moved into the old house, the family hadn't expected to find much left behind. But in the attic, hidden beneath layers of cobwebs and boxes, they discovered the doll. It belonged to the previous owner, a child who'd mysteriously vanished decades ago. At least, that's what the neighbors said. The parents brushed off the stories, but the child of the family felt differently. The little girl was fascinated, insisting the doll belonged in her room. It was placed on a high shelf, where it seemed harmless enough. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. It started small. A chair moved slightly out of place. A door left ajar that was shut tight before bedtime. And then there was the doll. The family swore it hadn't been touched, but every morning it seemed to be in a different position. Its head tilted, its arms shifted, its cracked smile slightly wider. The parents dismissed it as imagination. Dolls don't move, they said, but the child wasn't so sure. One night, she decided to prove it. She set up an old camera, aiming it directly at the doll before going to bed. If the doll was moving, she would catch it on tape. As the family slept, the house grew quiet, save for the ticking clock and the occasional groan of the old floorboards. But the camera caught something else. When the child reviewed the footage the next morning, her heart stopped. The doll didn't just move, it climbed down from the shelf. Its tiny porcelain hands gripped the edges as it dragged itself to the floor. Then it disappeared from view. Her parents didn't believe her. They refused to watch the footage, brushing it off as a trick of the light or a glitch in the old camera. But that night, they began to hear the noises too. The faint tapping, the tiny footsteps, and the unsettling sound of something being dragged across the floor. The parents locked the doll in a cabinet, convinced it was the source of the disturbances. But even behind glass, the doll wasn't silent. The next morning, the cabinet door was wide open, the doll nowhere to be found. They searched the entire house, but it was as if the doll had vanished. Then they heard it, the soft, rhythmic tapping of tiny feet in the attic. They found it sitting in the middle of the attic floor, its glassy eyes staring straight at them. In its lap was something new, a key, tarnished and ancient, with no clear purpose. Against their better judgment, they used the key. It opened a hidden door in the attic, revealing a small room filled with dusty toys, old photographs, and a child's diary. The entries were chilling. Stories of the doll moving at night, of whispers calling from the shadows, of a growing fear that the doll wanted something more. One entry stood out. "If you don't play with her, she'll find a way to make you." The family didn't stay in the house much longer. They packed their belongings and left, leaving the doll locked in the attic, sealed behind the hidden door. But even after they moved, they couldn't escape the feeling that they were still being watched. And somewhere, in the quiet darkness of that old attic, the doll sits and waits for its next playmate. The Phantom Train. In the heart of a quiet countryside, an abandoned railway stretches through a forgotten valley. Overgrown with weeds and cloaked in silence, the tracks are said to hold a secret, a train that hasn't run for a century. They call it the Phantom Train, and it only appears once every 100 years. Tonight, under the light of a blood moon, the legend comes alive. In the small village near the valley, whispers of the Phantom Train have passed through generations. The stories always begin the same: a train shrouded in mist, appearing out of nowhere, its passengers silent, and its destination unknown. Most dismissed it as folklore, but a few dared to believe. Among the villagers, a group of friends decided to uncover the truth. Armed with flashlights and fueled by curiosity, they ventured out to the old railway under the cover of darkness. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel louder. And then, in the distance, they heard it, the faint hum of a train. The group followed the sound, their flashlights flickering against the dense fog. Then they saw it, a faint glow on the horizon, growing brighter with each passing moment. The train emerged from the mist, its blackened metal glinting in the moonlight. But something about it was wrong. The train had no conductor, no crew, just carriages filled with shadowy figures, their faces obscured. The doors creaked open, and an icy wind swept through the group, as if inviting them aboard. Fear and curiosity wrestled within them. Was this their chance to prove the legend true, or would stepping aboard seal their fate? One by one they debated, their breath visible in the freezing air. Finally, against all reason, they stepped inside. Inside, the train was eerily pristine, as if untouched by time. Velvet seats lined the carriages, and chandeliers swayed gently with the motion of the train. But the passengers were the most unnerving. Their forms were translucent, their gazes fixed on a destination only they could see. The train jerked to life, accelerating down the tracks with unnatural speed. The friends moved from carriage to carriage, searching for answers. Each room seemed to tell a story: forgotten luggage, faded photographs, and journals filled with cryptic writings. They began to realize these weren't ordinary passengers. They were spirits, tethered to this world by unfinished business. The whispers grew louder as they neared the engine. "The conductor knows the way," the voices repeated. Finally, they reached the front car, where a shadowy figure stood at the controls. Its hollow eyes turned toward them, and its voice echoed like grinding metal. "Why have you come?" They stammered their response, asking what the train was and where it was going. The conductor's answer was cryptic. "This train carries the lost, and now, so do you." The train seemed alive, its walls pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The friends tried to escape, but every door led them deeper into the labyrinth of carriages. The passengers began to rise from their seats, their ghostly forms reaching out, their whispers growing into a deafening roar. They stumbled into the final carriage, where a glowing portal flickered in the air. Through it, they saw glimpses of their own lives, regrets, mistakes, and moments they wished they could change. The train wasn't just for the dead, it was for the living too. As the train stopped, the doors opened, and the friends found themselves back on the overgrown tracks. The train was gone, leaving only the distant echo of its whistle. They didn't speak of what they'd seen, what they'd felt. But each of them carried a piece of the phantom train with them, a reminder of the journey they'd taken and the ghosts they'd faced. The tracks remain, waiting for the next travelers brave, or foolish, enough to seek the phantom train, because some journeys never truly end. The Last Human. It began like any other morning. The sun rose over the city, casting its warm light on buildings, roads, and cars parked in neat rows. But as the day unfolded, it became clear something was missing. The laughter of children, the hum of conversation, the life of the world itself, all had vanished, leaving one man standing in a deafening silence. He didn't notice at first. The coffee shop on the corner was empty, but that wasn't unusual for an early morning. The streets were quieter than usual, but he appreciated the peace. It wasn't until midday, when the silence stretched unbroken, that he realized no one was coming. The world had emptied, and he was alone. Days turned into weeks. He searched for signs of life, walking through abandoned homes, broadcasting messages on old radios, scrawling notes on walls. "Is anyone there?" But the answer was always the same: nothing. Then, one night, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a low rhythmic hum. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't in his mind. Following the sound, he discovered an old factory on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the machines were still running, tended by something different. The factory wasn't empty. Dozens of humanoid figures moved in perfect synchronization, their mechanical limbs glinting in the dim light. They weren't human, but they weren't hostile. They ignored him entirely, focused on their endless work. It was then he realized he wasn't just the only human left. He was the only living thing left. The discovery left him reeling. For weeks he grappled with questions that had no answers. Where had everyone gone? Why was he still here? The machines were content to exist without purpose, but he wasn't. He needed to know why he had been spared, and if there was a way to bring the world back. Determined, he began investigating the factory. Its labyrinthine corridors were lined with strange symbols, glowing softly in the dim light. In one room, he found monitors showing scenes of cities long gone, and in another, rows of dormant machines waiting for something or someone to wake them. In the heart of the factory, he found a terminal. Its screen flickered to life as he approached, displaying a single message: "Activate protocol." His hands hesitated over the keyboard. Whatever this was, it held answers, but also danger. The monitors changed. They now displayed images of humans, millions of them, frozen in time, held in stasis. A voice crackled through the speakers, mechanical yet warm. The world is not lost. It sleeps, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The voice explained that humanity had been preserved to protect it from an extinction-level event. The machines had been left to maintain the world until the planet was ready to sustain life again. And he, the last human, was a fail-safe, chosen to ensure the machines didn't lose their purpose. But the machines had made a miscalculation. The systems were breaking down, and humanity's stasis couldn't last much longer. The voice offered him a choice: reawaken the world now, before it was truly ready, or leave it asleep forever. The decision weighed heavily on him. He roamed the factory, reliving the memories of the life he'd lost, imagining the faces of people he'd never see again. The world he knew was gone, but could he risk bringing humanity back to a planet that might still be hostile to them? Finally, he made his choice. He activated the protocol, setting the factory into motion. The machines began their work, dismantling stasis pods and reawakening the dormant humans within. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he heard a voice, a real human voice. The factory was no longer silent. The hum of life returned, filling the void with the sound of laughter, conversation, and footsteps. He stood among them, no longer alone, watching as the world began to heal. The machines had done their part, but now it was up to humanity to reclaim their place and build something new. And as the sun rose over the city, it wasn't empty anymore. For the first time in a century, the world was alive again. If you're enjoying these stories so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Your support inspires us to keep delivering even more amazing content. Now back to our final story. The sketches that came to life. It began with a blank sheet of paper, an innocent child, and a pencil. At first the drawings were simple: houses, flowers, happy little stick figures. But as time passed, the sketches grew darker, stranger, and impossibly real. The child loved to draw. It was a pastime that kept them entertained for hours, creating entire worlds with nothing more than pencil and paper. Their parents encouraged it, hanging the cheerful sketches on the refrigerator. But one day, the pictures changed. The creatures started appearing, A shadowy figure with jagged edges, a towering monster with too many limbs, eyes that seemed to stare back at you. At first, the parents laughed it off, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. But laughter turned to unease when the first creature showed up. Late one night, the family cat hissed and clawed at the air in the corner of the room. When the father turned on the light, he saw it. A shape, identical to the one in the most recent drawing, retreating into the shadows. The next morning, a new drawing appeared. A gaunt, skeletal figure with long, grasping fingers and hollow eyes. It was unsettling, but the family brushed it off as just another creepy sketch. That night, the mother woke up to strange noises outside the house. Footsteps. Peeking through the curtains, she saw it. The figure from the drawing, standing motionless under the streetlight. It didn't move, but its head tilted upward as if it knew she was watching. Panic set in. The parents decided to confront the child. "Why do you keep drawing these things?" they asked, their voices trembling. The child simply shrugged. "They come to me," they replied. "I don't know where they come from, but they want me to draw them." Every time they tried to stop the child from drawing, the creatures would grow more aggressive. Doors would slam shut, objects would fall from shelves, and shadows moved where they shouldn't. It was as if the act of drawing kept the monsters at bay, or worse, controlled them. The family decided to destroy the drawings. They gathered every sketch, every notebook, and burned them in the fireplace. The child screamed, begging them to stop, but it was too late. The drawings turned to ash, and for a moment, the house was still. That night the creatures didn't stay outside. They came inside. The family barricaded themselves in the bedroom, the child clutching their sketchpad tightly. "I can fix this," the child whispered. "I just need to draw." Desperate, the parents handed over a pencil. As the child drew frantically, the creatures outside the door grew quieter, their scratching and growling fading into the distance. The child's new drawing was different. It wasn't a creature, it was a door, a portal, glowing with light, pulling the darkness into it. The creatures were sucked inside, disappearing one by one, until only silence remained. The family thought it was over. They destroyed the last of the drawings and locked away the sketchpad. But the child's nightmares began the very next night. They whispered about new creatures more powerful than before, demanding to be drawn. The parents realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't something they could stop. The child wasn't creating the creatures. The creatures were using the child as a conduit. Now, the child sits alone, drawing by candlelight. The parents watch helplessly, knowing that every new sketch brings something else into the world. They've moved the family far away, but the creatures always find them. And the child? They no longer hum while they draw. They only whisper, "They're coming." And in the darkened room, another creature takes shape, waiting to step out of the page. If you loved this special episode, be sure to check out our other videos. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.